Hey everyone, and welcome to the course. My name is Daniel Buckley and I'll be your instructor. So in this course, we are going to go over an introduction to the Godot game engine. Let's have a look at what we're going to be creating. We'll be creating this 2D platformer game in Godot where you control this main player character. You can collect coins to increase your score, and there is also going to be a moving enemy which will restart the scene if you hit it. We're going to go over various different systems in this game, but first of all, let's go over what is Godot. Well, first of all, Godot is a free and open source game engine available to you right now. You can just go ahead, download it, and have the entire game engine there free to use without needing to pay anything. And you can create both 2D and 3D games in it. It's a pretty powerful engine, and you can pretty much make whatever game you can. So, along with this, we also need to know why are we going to use Godot. Well, first of all, it's important to know that Godot is free and open source, and what this means is that there's really no restrictions to how you can use the engine. If there is something about the engine you don't like or that you would like to add to it, you are free to do so. You can really change the engine how you want, and you can use the engine to its full extent without needing to worry about having to pay some sort of fee if you get to a certain point in development. It's also community driven. Godot has a GitHub page where anybody can contribute additions to the engine, and if the developers of the engine seem like that's a good addition, they'll even put it in a full release, which is really good. And you can also download other people's versions of the editor, so they might have their own custom version which has many new features, so you can choose between all these different types of the Godot engine. And the Godot engine is also growing very fast. This is a fairly recent game engine compared to all the other ones, and its popularity and community is steadily growing. So right now would be an amazing point to jump in and begin learning how to use it. We know why we should use it. Now let's go over what we're going to be using it for. So what are we going to learn in the Godot engine? First of all, we are going to learn how to install Godot and learning about the editor, learning what each of the panels do, how we can navigate around and understand our workflow in the engine. Then we are going to learn about the node and scene architecture of the engine. This is how you create objects and how these objects work with each other. We are then going to be creating a platform character. This is going to be a character you can control with the keyboard. They can jump, they can walk along platforms. We are also going to be learning the Godot scripting language, which is called GDScript. Now, something you do need to know about this course, there is a slight requirement of some sort of programming knowledge that is required. You don't need to understand everything about programming or be fluent in a certain language. You just need to understand the basics of programming logic, such as the concept of functions, variables, and how they work with each other. We will be going over how these things work again, but it is good if you do already have that pre-existing knowledge so that you can build off from that. And it's also good to note that with GDScript, this is very similar to Python in terms of syntax. There are a few differences that we'll go over, but overall, if you know Python, then you're going to be very comfortable with learning GDScript. So after this, we're also going to be creating enemies and collectible coins, just more elements to add to our platformer game and add more things for the player to do other than just jumping around. Then finally, we're going to be looking at Godot's UI system and the audio system to add more to our game, so we can see our score and hear a sound effect when we collect a coin. Zenva is an online learn academy with over 500,000 students. We feature a wide range of courses for people who are just starting out or for people who just want to learn something new. The courses are also very versatile, allowing you to learn in really whatever way you want. You can choose to view the online video tutorials or read the included lesson summaries. So with that all said, let's get started with learning the Godot game engine. Hey everyone, in this lesson we're going to be going over how to install and set up Godot. So here I am on godotengine.org. This is the main website for Godot. And as you can see here, we have a typical landing page for a website like this. We have at the top here in our navbar, we can look at the features, the news, the community, and more. Let's go to the features real quick just to have an overview of what we can actually create here in Godot. So this is a game engine and it features both 3D and 2D capabilities. So we can make 2D games and 3D games as seen in these images here. Godot also has animation, so you can animate anything, as it says here. It also has its own scripting language, which is used in order to program things in the engine. So if you want a character to move, you can script that in. And this uses GDScript, which is similar to Python if you've ever used Python before. So with that, let's go up to the top and let's download Godot. So what we need to do is just click on the download button up here at the top. This is going to take us to the download page. We can choose between Linux, Mac, and Windows, so depending on what sort of system you have, select that. I got Windows, so I'm going to be downloading Windows. And we want to be downloading the standard version, and either download the 64-bit or 32-bit depending on your operating system. I got 64-bit, so I'm going to select that one, and it is going to begin downloading a zip file which contains our Godot engine. Now, unlike many other engines you may have heard of or may have even used in the past, Godot is a very lightweight engine. There's not a lot of content built into the engine, such as various different compilers for each of the different platforms we're going to be using. So if we open up the zip file here, you'll see that all we have inside is a exe file, an exe application which we can then launch, and you can see that it is only going to be 63 megabytes. Now, for a game engine, that's not very large at all, since it does need to be able to compile, build a 3D or 2D game. So what we want to do with this here is we could just double click it to launch into Godot right now, but what we're going to do is we are going to extract this to pretty much anywhere on your computer. So I'm going to extract this file here over into my documents folder, and then that is pretty much the installation of Godot completed. We have installed the engine. Oh, I wouldn't really say it's installing the engine, it's more just extracting a file which can then launch into the engine. Yeah, because it is a very lightweight, very pretty easy to download. There's no installation process we have to go through. It doesn't have to download files from the internet. Everything is contained within this exe application, which is very nice. So once you have that extracted to wherever you want on your computer, we can just go to that folder, and as you can see here, we have Godot. I'm using the 3.2 version, and to open it, we can just simply double click, and it will open up the Godot project manager right here. You'll also see that there is a console that launches as well, but we don't need to touch that. We just want to focus on the project manager. And the reason why mine is this white theme is because by default you will launch up with the default dark theme, but you can of course change that inside of the editor later on. It shows you a list of all your projects you have right here, and we can choose to create a new project or import an existing project that you might have copied over from the internet or from another computer. But we're going to be focusing on this in the next lesson, where we actually begin to create our new Godot project. So I'll see you all then. Welcome back everyone. In this lesson we are going to be creating our first Godot project and just having an overview of the editor, looking at all the different things and just getting an understanding of how this engine works. So first of all, we are here in our Godot project manager. This can be launched by double clicking on the exe application which we downloaded in the previous lesson. And here in the project manager we have a list of all of our existing projects. I already have some here because I've created some projects in the past, but if this is your first time launching Godot, this will most likely be empty. There's also this templates tab which allows us to download some existing templates off the Godot website, which could be interesting if you want to learn how to do a certain thing in the engine. But for us right now, we're going to go back to the projects tab and we want to click on the new project button right here. This will launch up this little window right here, and what we want to do is first of all give our project a name. So I'm just going to give this one, let's just say this first Godot project, and as you can see here it also says please choose an empty folder. By default this will set the project path to be the folder where you have the exe installed. So what we can do is just click on create folder. It'll create a new folder here in my documents, for example, because that is where this application is. And we can then click create and edit. And here we are inside of the Godot engine. It may be a bit confusing because there's lots of buttons, lots of options, lots of different windows, but we'll get an understanding of how they all work very shortly. So first of all, you can see in the middle here we have this 3D view of our world. And what we need to do is switch it back over to 2D, since that is what we're going to be working with. So up here at the top you'll see 2D, 3D, script and asset library. let's just click on 2D and it will switch us over to a 2D mode where we can see it on a flat plane. So let's begin with the concept of scenes and nodes in Godot. Godot is a game engine that is built upon using nodes, a node-based system. And what a node is pretty much anything that has any sort of function in your game is a node. For example, the player, the enemies, the coins, the tiles. It could even be a light, a interactable object. Anything that you can see, you can interact with, or anything that you want to have a function, such as holding a script which can then execute a piece of code. That is a node. And Godot uses these nodes to structure a scene. And a scene is basically a collection of nodes, and each node can also have children nodes. So if we have a player, for example, we're going to have a main player node. That player is going to have multiple children nodes. One of them will be a sprite, so it can have some sort of visual image. It is also going to have a collider node, so it has the ability to collide with other objects. Now, when we have these player nodes, these enemy nodes, these are all going to be added into our final main scene, which is going to be what gets launched when we play the game. And in our main scene, everything is going to be a child of the main scene node. So let's actually go ahead and create that now. Over here in the scene panel right here, this is going to be the list of all the nodes in our current scene. So it says create root node. I'm just going to click on the 2D scene button right here. And as you can see, it has created a new node. Right now it's called node 2D. This doesn't really explain what it is, so let's just double click on it. And I'm going to rename this here to our main scene, because this is going to be our main scene right here. Straight away, in the middle panel here, nothing really happened. But over on the right hand side, in the inspector panel, you can see that there's all of a sudden some sort of information. And what the inspector is basically a list of all the properties of the selected node. So here we have the transform. If we click on that, we can change and view the position, the rotation, and the scale of the node. On canvas item, we have visibility, so we can toggle if it's visible or not, and some various other options as well. If this is a light node, then we can change the intensity, the color of the light, and various different things depending on that node. If it's a UI node, we can change what text that UI is going to display, what image it's displaying. If it's a collider node, we can change the type of collider, the size of it, etc. So we have our main scene right here. Now, what we need to do first of all is save this main scene, because right now you can see here it is unsaved. So I'm just going to go Control S, and it is going to ask us to save the scene as. We're going to save it as main scene.tscn, so we can just hit enter. And down here in the file system panel, you can see that we have this new main scene object added. And the file system here is just going to be a view of our file structure, our folder structure, where our project is stored. So we can see stuff such as our assets. This includes our scenes, our sprites, our textures, our scripts, our audio clips. Pretty much anything that is an asset for the game is going to be stored here in the file system. Okay, we'll be going over this a bit more once we start importing some assets. In the center here, we have our main scene window, and this is where we can pretty much interact with the game, where we can select stuff, where we can view what the game is going to look like. We can also switch between 2D mode and 3D mode up here, which, since we're just working on a 2D game, we're just going to stay on the 2D mode right here. We also have a script button, which switches us over to the scripting side of Godot. And in here is where we are going to be modifying our scripts. We're going to be creating a script for the player, for the enemy, for the coins, and this is where we're going to be programming that individual functionality for each of those things. So back in 2D mode here, we can move around by holding down middle mouse or right mouse. But yeah, this is basically the screen size where we're going to be adding elements in, so we can have the rough approximation of how large those things will look on our screen. So we have our main scene here added and saved as a asset here in the file system. Now, since this is an asset in the file system, what we can do is create a new instance of the scene if we wish, but we're not going to be doing that for our main scene. For our player though, we're going to have a separate scene for our player, a separate scene for our enemy, and a separate scene for our coins. And this is going to allow us to individually modify the aspects of each of those and then create an instance of that inside of our main scene. because since we're going to have multiple enemies, for example, you might in your project, you don't want to have to go over to every single enemy node every single time you want to make a change. Instead, we can just make one change to the main enemy scene, and that change will apply to all instances of that enemy across the main scene. If you have ever used the Unity engine, think of that as prefabs. Okay, so we got a basic understanding of how scenes and nodes work. We'll of course get a much deeper understanding as we continue with this project and actually get into creating those. But for now, let's go over some of the other aspects of the engine here. Over here in the top left, or top right I mean, is all the different buttons to actually play our game, to test it out. So right here we have the play button, and this will launch the game and allow us to play it. We have the pause button so we can pause the game, and the stop button so we can stop playing the game. Over here we have the play scene, so this will just launch the game into the scene we're currently on. And this right here allows us to play a custom scene, so we can select a scene to launch. And that's about it for going over the basic overview of the editor. In the next lesson, we're going to begin setting up our project. We'll be learning more about nodes, about scenes, and we'll be importing some assets to use for this project. So I'll see you all then in the next lesson. Welcome back everyone. In the previous lesson we started to learn about the Godot editor, and we created our first scene, the main scene right here, which just contains one node of main scene, and this here is our root node, which everything else is going to be a child of. All of our tiles, our UI, our camera, all of those elements are going to be a child of this main scene node. So in this lesson, we are going to begin to create our player, the player of which we can control, we can move around, jump, collect stuff. This is going to be the main part of this game. So what we're going to do is, we're not going to create a new node in this scene right here. Instead, we are going to create a brand new scene for our player. But before we do that, let's actually go ahead and import some assets that we'll be needing for this project, and some additional ones which we can also use later on. What we want to do is select the res:// folder, which is the root folder for our project. We want to right click on that, and then we just want to click on Open in File Manager. This will open up a brand new window here with our folder, our first Godot project folder here. You'll see that we have our main scene, we have the default icon that comes with every Godot project, and a .import folder which just contains some information about the assets. So what we're going to do is download the included assets which come with this course. You can download that through the course files, and this is going to contain 3 folders of assets. First of all, we have the sprites folder, so let's drag that into our first Godot project folder right here. And inside of this, we just have a number of different sprites. We have the coin, we have the enemy, we have the player idle, then we also have a tile sprite as well. Okay, along with these sprites, we also want to import this font folder, which just includes the Ubuntu regular font, which is what we're going to be using for this game. And let's import the audio folder, which has a sound effect for the coin collection. And this is a TRES file, which is what we can use inside of Godot, but I'll also show you how you can actually create your own audio files inside of Godot too. So we've got that stuff. Now let's go back into our project here. You'll see that it's importing the files, and they are right here in the our file system. So what we can do is we can open up sprites, and you'll see that we have each of these sprites here. If we double click on one, we'll see some of the settings here in the inspector. We can modify it a bit if we want to, but we'll just leave it like so. To create our player, what we're going to do is we're going to go to scene here, and we're going to go new scene. And what we want to do is we want to create a root node for this scene, which is going to be a player. Now, we don't want to just have a 2D scene for our player, because we want this player to be able to move around and interact with colliders. We want the player to be able to walk on the ground, have physics applied to them. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on other node for our root node, and we are going to look for a kinematic body 2D. We can double click on that. And as you can see here, we now have a kinematic 2D body node created as the root node for our scene. Now this here is a node that has properties that allows us to create a 2D platformer character much easier. it has functions that we can call when we're scripting to be able to move around and interact with physics objects. As you can see here in the inspector under Kinematic Body 2D, we have collision, so we can manage colliding with objects, and motion, we can also enable some of these, but we're going to leave these options alone as we don't need to modify any of these. So let's rename this Kinematic Body 2D by double clicking on it, and I'm going to call it our player. Now if we select the player, right now there's nothing on screen to show that the player is there. So we need some sort of sprite to be the visual representation of this player. So inside of our sprites folder, let's drag in the player underscore idle PNG into the scene here. And as you can see, it creates a brand new node, which is a child of player. So whenever this main player node moves around, this sprite will follow it. If we delete this player node, this player sprite node will also be deleted. Whatever happens to this main node also happens to the children nodes. As you can see here, we have this green line and this red line. This green line here is the y-axis, and this red line here is the x-axis going horizontally. And this center point here where they intersect is the 0, 0 coordinate. Now we want to move this player sprite to be in the middle here. It's just much easier to manage stuff when everything is centered around the center. We can drag it over, but as you can see, it's not precise. So over here in the transform property, let's set the position to 0 on the x and 0 on the y. So the player is now centered in the middle. While we're at it, let's also save this scene. So we'll go Control S. It'll ask us to save the scene as. Right now it's player.tscn. We'll just hit enter because that's what we want to call it. And as you can see here in our file system, there is now a new scene called player.tscn. So we got that saved. I'm actually going to rename this player underscore idle sprite right here just to sprite, so it's easily seen what this is. And as you can see on our player here, there is a warning sign. And if we hover over it, you'll see that it's a node configuration warning. And it says this node has no shape, so it can't collide or interact with other objects. And the reason why is because in order to have a Kinematic Body 2D node, it needs to have a collider node as well in order to detect collisions, because right now it doesn't know how big the collider is, what shape it is, where it's supposed to be. So what we want to do is right click on player, go add child node, and we just want to look for a collision shape 2D. Double click on that, and it will create a new collision shape 2D. So let's select our collider shape 2D here, and in the inspector we want to give it a shape to pretty much say what does this collider look like. So here in shape, click on the arrow, and we're going to select new rectangle shape 2D. It will create a rectangle shape here on screen, but as you can see it's pretty small, so what we want to do is change the size of it. You'll see that if we have the collider selected, there are these 3 little dots on the collider, so we can click and drag on those to increase it horizontally like this, vertically like this, and if we want a sort of free transform, we can do it that way. As you can see, when we increase it this way, it does it a bit off center because our sprite isn't directly in the center. We'll have to go down to the transform property and just move it down on the y. So we'll set the y here to be probably -15. Oops, actually positive 15. Let's increase this in size a bit. There we go. We just cover the top of the head, the bottom of the feet, and horizontally it doesn't really matter. Let's set this to maybe a 1 or a... On the X here, let's set this to -1, and as you can see here, it covers up most of the player. We don't need to really cover up the hands, but there we go. We have our player node here, which is of kinematic body. We'll go over in the next lesson how to script this, how to set it up to allow us to move the player around. We also have the sprite node right here, which renders an image on screen, and a collision shape 2D, which gives us an idea on how we're going to collide with other objects. We've got our player node here, but as you can see, there is no scene here. We're not going to be adding anything else to this scene, because this player scene is only going to store the player. So we'll save that, and at the top here we can click on main scene, and what we want to do now is drag this player.tscn into our new scene here. And as you can see in the hierarchy here, a player node has appeared, and this player node is an instance of the player scene. So if we were to go back to our player scene here, we'll save that. If we go back to our player scene here and we make some sort of change, this instance over in the main scene will change as well. So we got our player here, we can click to drag them around like so. We'll just keep them here for now. But if we save that and then we click on the play button, it will say, please confirm there's no main scene selected. So we'll just go select, we'll select the main scene to be our main scene, which is going to be the scene that launches at the start of the game. Hit enter, and it will boot up the game here, and as you can see, our player is now on screen in this little window here. Okay, we got that all set up. Now in the next lesson we are going to add the ability to actually move our player around, because right now they don't really do anything. We can't move them around with the arrow keys, we can't jump, we can't do anything. So that's what we're going to be working on in the next lesson. So I'll see you all then. Welcome back everyone. In this lesson we are going to begin scripting our player over here. So in the previous lesson we set up this player scene, which has our player node, and as a child of it a sprite node and a collision node. And we also drag this instance of the player from the file system here into the main scene. So we now have a player in our main scene, and if we press play here you'll see that our player has appeared. So I'm just going to click on the stop button up here, and what we're going to be doing now is actually beginning to script. We're going to be scripting the player movement, the gravity, and also setting it up so when we press a certain input something happens. So I'm just going to click on output here to toggle that off, and we're going to begin by going up to project settings, and inside the input map tab we can add in some new keys, and the keys we want to add is going to be the ability to move left, right, and jump. So up here where it says action, I'm going to create a new action, and this one is going to be called move_left. I can hit enter to add it, and as you can see it's added here at the bottom. Let's also add in move_right and jump. So there we go. We've got our three movements or actions down here. Now to assign a key to it, all we need to do is click on the plus over on the side, select key, and then we need to just press the key on our keyboard to pretty much whatever we want it to be. So move left is going to be the left arrow key, we can hit OK. Move right is going to be the right arrow key, we'll hit OK, and jump is going to be the up arrow key, and we'll hit OK. We've got our three inputs right here that we're going to be using. We can now hit close, and to create a script inside of Godot, we're going to go over to the player scene over here, and in the player scene I'm going to select our player node, which is the kinematic body 2D, and down here in the inspector you'll see that there is a script drop down. We'll select that, and right now we have an empty script, and the thing about nodes is that each node can hold a script. You can only hold one script, but every single node has the ability to hold a script. So if you do want this player to have multiple scripts, you will have to create multiple nodes for the player. So I'm just going to click where it says empty here, and then go new script. It'll ask us to create a new script and attach it to the node. By default it calls a script whatever the name of the node is, so that's player. We'll want our script to be called player, so we'll just hit on create right here. As you can see here in the file system, it's created a new asset, player.gd, which is the file extension for a Godot script. And over here in the middle, you'll see that this panel has changed over to the script tab. And what we see here is the scripting interface. In the middle here, we have the ability to enter in our code, write it down. On the left hand side here, top left, is going to be a view of all our scripts, so we can click between them to navigate between them. And down here at the bottom left is going to be a list of our functions, or our methods. Now for this course, it is recommended that you already have some knowledge of programming, but you do need to have a rough understanding of the programming logic. So here we are going to be coding in GDScript, and what GDScript is, it's pretty much very similar to Python, although it does have a few differences. As you can see here for the functions, we do have, instead of having a function being defined as def, we have it defined as func, and just a couple other differences which I will go over as we continue. So right now we have a function pre-built for us right here, and all this is the _ready function, and a function is just a block of code which we can call. So if you do want to have repeated code that you don't want to be writing out every single time you want to do something, you can put it inside a function and just call that function. So the _ready function is built into Godot, and this actually gets called straight away once the node is initialized. So once the node is created inside of the game, then this ready function gets called once. So this is good for if you want to initialize some values or find certain objects in the surrounding scenes that you might want to use later on. But for us now, I'm going to delete everything except for the extends kinematic body 2D. And what this means is we're pretty much extending the node which the script is on. Since we are on the kinematic body 2D node, we're going to be extending that node so we have the ability to use some of the kinematic body 2D's functions, such as the move and slide function, which will allow us to move this player and interact with colliders. If you're used to some other programming languages, think of extends as inheriting from another class. So we've got our blank script right here. What we're going to do first of all is create some of our variables to store our data. And just a quick refresher, variables are basically containers which can hold data. They can hold all different types of data. They can hold numbers, text, booleans, which is true or false, and various other things as well. They can also hold nodes, which we'll be looking at very shortly. So to begin, let's create our first variable, which is going to store the player's score, because eventually we're going to be able to collect coins, which will increase our score. And to create a variable in Godot script, we first of all have to type var for variable. Then we have to enter in a name for our variable, and this is going to be called score. Now, what we can do, since Godot script is a dynamic language, what this means is that we don't have to hard code data types for our variables and various other things. Basically, a variable can be any data type at any time. So if the score here is a number, later on we can all of a sudden change this over to a string, for example, or to a boolean. That's the benefit of dynamic language, although on the downside it could be confusing on what this variable type is. So what we're going to do for this course, we are going to assign data types to all of our variables. So normally you'd go var score and then you'd go equals and then you'd give it an initial value of 0, for example. So now score here has a data type of int, and later on we could change this to a different data type if we want, but we want to keep it as an integer, which is a whole number. So what we're going to do is hard code in a data type by, after we go score, we're going to go colon and then int. So var score colon int equals 0. We'll have a variable called score. It's of type integer, and we are giving it a predetermined value of 0. Now, along with this, we also need a couple more variables. This is going to be for our player's physics. So first of all, we'll have var for speed, and this is going to be an integer as well of 200. Let's have another variable for the jump force. So this is going to be the force that gets applied vertically when we jump. This is going to be of type int, of course, as well, and this is going to be equal to 600. So we've got speed, jump force, and now we need gravity because we do want gravity to be applied downwards to our player. So we'll go var gravity int equals 800. And of course these values can be tweaked later on. If you want to change them, you can totally do that. Now, along with this, we also need a few more variables. The first one is going to be var, and this is going to be our velocity because we want to keep track of what our velocity is, and velocity is basically, in terms of Godot, it's going to be how many pixels we are going to be moving per second in a certain direction. And a velocity, we are going to be storing it as a vector2. So I'll write that out real quick. We'll go vel, which is short for velocity, colon vector2 equals vector2, and then 2 parentheses to initialize a new instance of a vector2. So what is a vector2? Well, a vector2 is pretty much a data type which can hold two values. It can hold an x and it can hold a y. And if you've done vector maths before, that's pretty much what this is. A vector2 can hold information such as a certain position in space, a rotation, a scale, or even a direction that we're facing or that we want to move into. What we want to do is create another variable, and this is going to be a variable which stores a node, more specifically our sprite node here on our player. So in the script, we want to create a new variable, so I'm going to go var, and we're going to call this one our sprite. So this here is going to be of type sprite, like so. Sprite is a data type which we can use, and this is going to be equal to $sprite. Now, what does this $sprite mean? So this $sign is pretty much saying, okay, I want you to look through all of our children nodes here, and find the node of whatever type is after the $sign, which is sprite. So this sprite variable here is going to be a reference to this sprite node, and what that's going to allow us to do is modify this sprite node. So more specifically for our case, what we're going to be doing on our sprite node here is we are going to be enabling or disabling the flip H value right here to determine which way we are facing. So if we're moving left, flip H is going to be true. If we're moving right, flip H is going to be false. In the next lesson, we're going to continue by moving on to setting up the actual physics, setting up the actual inputs, and moving our player around. So I'll see you all then in the next lesson. Welcome back, everyone. In the previous lesson, we started to actually script our player over here. We set up our variables, but as you can see here, we do have an error, and that says use onReadyVar equals getNode instead. And what this means is that this $sign sprite here isn't necessarily recommended to be used. This is one way you can get a child node. Another way is by using the getNode function, which requires you to enter in a path to that node. I'll show you how to do that. So instead of $sign sprite, we can use get_node, and what this does is it requires a string to the node path. Is similar to a file directory path, but since this sprite is a direct child of the player, we can just enter in the name of the node, which is sprite. So this is going to find the sprite node and then assign it to this variable right here. Now what we can't do is call this right now. We want to call this when the game starts. So what we could do is use the _ready function, which gets called right at the start when the node is initialized, and then we could find the sprite node. Or what we can do is add on a little thing before var here called onReady. And what this onReady word does is pretty much means when the game is ready, or when the node is ready. Once the node's been initialized, then this variable here will find the node of sprite. So this is just a good way if you want to basically find a node in the scene or find a node in the game, because you can't do that before the game has started. You can't pre-compile something like that. So that is where the onReady property attribute comes in handy. Okay, so what we're going to be doing now is basically implementing the ability for our player to move around and jump and have gravity applied to them. And this is going to be done inside of the func_physics process function, and you should see that it pops up automatically. We can hit enter, and this is a function that is built into Godot, more specifically built into the kinematic body 2D here. And what this does is this gets called 60 times a second, and it also has a delta parameter here, which we'll go over in just a bit. Now this function here, what we're going to do in here is check to see, first of all, are we pressing the left button or are we pressing the right button, and then change our velocity based on that. So at the start, we first of all want to set our velocity on the X value to be 0, because we don't want to be able to press the left mouse button we don't want to press the left arrow key once and then have the player keep on moving left. We want to stop once we're no longer pressing the button. So we'll set the X velocity to 0 at the start, and then we'll check our movement inputs. And to do that, we can go if, and to check if an action has been pressed, we can go if input dot is_action pressed. Now there's a couple here. We have just pressed, which gets called on the first frame this action has been pressed down. Just released gets called on the frame that the action has been released, and is action pressed gets called every frame that this action is being held down. So, and as you can see then, we have a bunch of different actions we can select. Select move left, and then at the end of the if statement you want to put a colon to basically define that this if statement is done, and we are now going to execute code that is going to be called if this condition is true. So if we are holding down the left button, the left arrow key, we want to set our velocity on the X value to be equal to negative speed. So I'm going to go vel.x minus equals speed. And then we also want to have it so that if we are holding down the right button, we are moving positively. So we can go if input.is action pressed, move right, then we want to go vel.x plus equals speed. Okay, so we got this vel.x value here, which we are changing based on the keyboard inputs. Now we want to apply this to our actual player so it can move left and it can move right. And there is a very handy function inside of this kinematic 2D, or this kinematic body 2D here, which is called move and slide. And to do that, we can just go move underscore and underscore slide. And we need to give it two variables, or two values. We need to give, first of all, a velocity, so we'll just send over the vel for velocity. And we need to give it a direction, and this direction is basically to tell the game, or to tell our kinematic body, which direction is the floor pointing, because this is how it takes into consideration whether or not we are standing on the ground or if we're in the air. So, since the ground is going to be below us, the ground is pointing up, we can go vector2 dot up, and vector2 dot up is a pre-built function, a pre-built vector2 variable, which we can easily access. We can go vector2 dot, and there's a bunch of others. We got down, left, 1, right, up, and 0. And up, all it is just vector2 with an x value of 0 and a y value of 1. So we got that there. And in fact, what we want to do is we want to actually set vel to be equal to move and slide, because move and slide here does return a new velocity as a return type of this function, which we want to assign back to velocity, as this is going to make doing gravity a lot easier for us. So we got that set up, and in fact, let's press the play button now and test it out. So make sure this script here is saved, click the play button at the top right, and if we hold down the right arrow key, we'll begin moving right, left arrow key will begin moving left. So we got the left and right movement set up and ready to go. Now what we need to do is make it so that this sprite here flips. If we're moving left, we want the sprite to be facing left, and since we're moving right, we want it to be facing right when we're moving right. So we'll click on the stop button, and down here what we want to do is check to see if our velocity is if our x velocity is greater than 0. If so, we want to flip the sprite. So we'll start off by going if vel.x is less than 0, so if we're moving left, then we want to go sprite.flip underscore h equals true. So if we're moving left, we want to be facing left. Then we can just do elif, which is else if, and this is going to be else if vel.x is greater than 0, then sprite.flip h equals false, like so. Okay, so we can press play again and test this out. And as you can see, here we go. When we move left, our sprite looks left. When we move right, the sprite looks right. Okay, we got that all set up. Now all we need to do is apply gravity and the ability to jump. So for gravity over here, and in fact I'm just going to add in some comments. To do a comment, we can just go hashtag and then whatever you want to say about a certain thing. So we'll go movement inputs here. And don't worry about these comments, they don't get compiled with the code, they're just there for us to see. We'll then go hashtag applying the velocity, and over here we'll go sprite direction. Now what we want to do is gravity. So for gravity, this is going to be pretty straightforward. We're just going to get our y velocity and add on the gravity multiplied by delta. And what delta is pretty much the distance or the time duration between each frame. So since this physics process is being called 60 times a second, this delta is going to pretty much be 1 divided by 60. A very small number, but this is going to convert this into a time frame of seconds of pixels per second rather than pixels per frame, which is what we want in case there is some varying frame rates between computers. Then we also want to add in the jump input. So here we can just go if input dot is action just pressed, so if an action has just been pressed, and that is going to be the jump key, and if we are sitting on the ground, because we don't want to be able to jump if we're already in the air. So to do this, we can go and is underscore on underscore floor. And this is another built-in function with Godot, with the kinematic body 2D here. And this returns true or false to whether or not we're standing on the ground. We'll go colon. So if we're on the ground and we just press the jump button, then we want to go vel.y minus equals jump force. Now when we press play, you'll notice that straight away we're just going to begin falling. And that is because there is of course no ground underneath us. So in the next lesson, we are going to be looking at actually setting up some tiles which we can stand on. So I'll see you all then in the next lesson. Welcome back everyone. In the previous lesson we finished scripting our player, or we finished scripting the movement aspect of the player. So we can move left to right, we can jump, but we actually just fall off screen and we can't actually jump just yet because we don't have anything to stand on. We don't have any ground we can stand on. So in this lesson we are going to be creating the tile. And this tile node is going to have a sprite for the visual, and it's also going to have a collider because we need to be able to collide with this sprite. And this is going to be created in a brand new scene, and then we're going to have multiple instances of that scene in our main scene right here. So let's go scene, new scene, and we're going to go other node for our root node, and this root node is going to be of type static body 2D. Now a static body 2D is a physics node, and this is pretty much just a static physics node. It doesn't really move, it doesn't have a velocity, it doesn't have gravity, it doesn't have any of those physics properties applied to it, but it is good if you just want a solid object that you can collide with. So I'm going to rename this here to tile. I'm going to go Control S to save it in our main project folder right here, and first up let's drag in the tile sprite. So in sprites here, let's drag in the tile.png image. I'm going to rename this here to our sprite, and I'm going to set the position, the transform position, to be 0 and 0 on the X and Y, so it's in the center here. Along with the sprite we also need to have a collider, so we'll add a child node to the tile, and we want to add in a collision shape 2D. We'll set the shape here in the inspector to be a new rectangle shape, and if we select the new rectangle shape here, it pops up with some properties such as extents. And the extents here are pretty much the bounds of which this collider fills. So for the X, I'm going to set it to be 32, and for the Y, that'll be 32 as well. So here you can see that it fills in the entire area of our sprite. Can save that, and that's pretty much the tile done. It's not really a complex object. We're not going to have any script attached to it, so we can go to the main scene now. And I'm going to drag in the tile.tsn, which is now here in the file system. I'm going to drag that into our main scene, just under our player here, and we can press play, and what we should see is the player falls down onto the tile, as we see here. We can move left, right, we can jump now that we're on the tile, we can't jump multiple times in the air, and if we fall off the tile, we'll fall down below the screen. So what we can do now is actually just begin to create our level. You can set this up in whatever way you want, but I will show you a few tips that will help you along the way. So we've got our tile here, and you might of course want to have tiles next to each other. So what you can do is you can go Control D to duplicate and drag that out. But as you can see, it's kind of hard to have these tiles match up together. That looks like it is, but you zoom in, there's still a little gap. It's pretty hard to eyeball this sort of thing. You can go into the transform property here and modify these values individually to figure out where they should be, but that's kind of complex. So what I'm going to do is show you how to turn on snapping. So here in the main scene, or in the middle panel, at the top here we have various different tools that we can use. We of course have the move tool, or the select tool here, which allows us to select various different things, and if we click and drag we can move them around. Now if we click on these four arrows here, this will toggle the move tool, which is basically the exact same thing as this little hand pointer. So in 2D it's not really that different. But this rotational tool right here, if we click on it, rotate mode, we can click and drag to rotate it around the pivot point. This scale mode over here allows us to click and drag. We can scale along each axis, or we can just click and drag to scale however we want. We can hold shift to scale uniformly, and yeah. Apart from that, that is all we really need to know in this panel here. Apart from, I'll just switch back to the select tool. Apart from this one here, which is use grid snap, shortcut shift G. So we can select that, and as you can see here, it all of a sudden changed the background here. Now when we click on one of our things, you'll see that it snaps to the grid, which is pretty good. We can move it around, we can snap it, say here, we can select this one, and it snaps automatically in place. So with this, we can then duplicate a bunch of tiles and fill in a little level on the screen here. Make sure right now it is inside the bounds of this blue rectangle here. It might be a bit hard to see, but there is a blue rectangle here which basically defines the bounds of our screen, so whatever we can see. I'm going to begin by just placing a tile down here right at the bottom, so just something like this. I'm just going to stick to these predefined grid squares because that seems to fit the size of our tiles nicely. So we can select these tiles here, Control D, move them over, and continue to duplicate them like so. So there we go. I built a little level right here. We can press play and test it out. So we can move it left, right. We can jump between the different platforms here. We can go down. And you see that it's pretty smooth. We got the smooth movement. The jumping's pretty smooth. We can collide with all the different elements here in the scene. Oh, but we can't fit up there. Might need to modify that a bit. So yeah, this overall is the basics for the platformer complete. Now from here we can add in various different additional elements such as collectible coins, so we can have a score that goes up, and as well as some enemies which are going to be objects that can move left and right, or it can move from one position to another position, and if we happen to collide with it, then the game will reset. So in the next lesson, we're going to begin working on creating our enemies. So when they hit us, the scene will restart, and that's just going to be something that we can add in and make this platform a bit more exciting. So I'll see you all then in the next lesson.